Folks, I've got time to start, so we'll go ahead and get started so seriously I can try to get you out here on time tonight. What we're going to try to do is to have you out here in about an hour and a half. The format that I've already been asked about tonight is basically going to, I'll do just a bit of an introduction. I'll keep my remarks brief. Those of you that know me know that that's probably difficult for me to do, but I'll do the best that I can. Short introduction of our speakers, and then I'll turn it over to them for a presentation, and then I'll have a very brief presentation that'll just more or less wrap up what has already been said. And then at the expiration of that, we'll welcome comments from each and every one of you. The last thing in the world we would do is ask you to come out to a forum like this and then not give you time to speak to these concerns yourself. Let me start out by saying this. A gentleman by the name of Harry J. Anslinger, Harry Jacob Anslinger. You know him? You know your history. Harry Anslinger was the director of the newly formed Bureau of Narcotics back in the early 30s. He was a very outspoken opponent of marijuana, very much so. So much so that he made it pretty much his personal vendetta to ensure that marijuana was made illegal. In fact, in a testimony before Congress in 1932, he offered this quote. He said, "Marijuana was the assassin of today's youth." Harry Anslinger, while very, very effective, also was very, very exaggerated. Much of his the message that he carried was infiltrated with untruths, innuendos, and quite frankly, blatant lies. But the message carried forth, and marijuana was ultimately made illegal when the states adopted the Federal State Narcotics Act of 1936, and has remained so up until recent years, where you'll hear presentations tonight about what's being done with it more recently. I offer you that for this reason. You know, I think, and these are my thoughts, these are not the thoughts of the Owensboro Police Department or law enforcement in general, these are my thoughts. And since I've been asked to be the MC tonight, I'll take that liberty to express some of my thoughts to you. I think law enforcement has done ourselves somewhat of a disservice over the course of the years. I can recall as a student at Davis County High School in the mid-'60s of a police officer coming out to County High School and spoke of the evils of the particular drugs of choice at that time were the psychedelics, the hallucinogenics, LSD, peyote, and things of that nature. And I can recall how he spoke to the evils of that drug in such a fashion as to scare the audience to conform to their way of thinking. Now, understand this, folks. I completely concur with what was said, but in retrospect, I disagree with the way the message was conveyed. That continued on into the 70s. I started my career in law enforcement in the early 70s. And I can recall that we in law enforcement, myself, as we addressed audiences such as this, and we addressed the drug of choice at that time, a drug called PCP, phencyclidine. And we all recall the issue with Rodney King's and the unpredictable, radical, irrational behavior associated with that drug. And I can recall speaking to a group one time and describing that drug as a terror of a drug, and indeed it was, and is. But again, it was the manner in which we conveyed the message. And it continued on into the 80s. The drug of choice at that time was what? We all recall that. Cocaine hydrochloride. Later, the smokable derivative of that drug, crack. And all of us here, and all the law enforcement officers in this room today, as well as those of you that may have personal experience and know people associated with that drug, know of the violent acts that brought to society and whatnot. And we in law enforcement, again, championed that as the worst of the worst, the devil incarnate. I think we learned something along the way in that when we addressed forums such as this, that we owed it to ourselves and to the integrity of the law enforcement profession, that when we had a message to convey, we should do it in a fashion where we welcomed opposing comment. And we took that into consideration. You know, we in law enforcement teach our young officers, when they investigate a crime, to make decisions based on the totality of the circumstances, the big picture, if you would, all of the facts. I'm reminded of Dragnet and Sergeant Friday's infamous words, just the facts. And so I say all that to say this. And I can tell you that I think we've done well in that in more recent years as we address the issue of methamphetamine, and after that the prescription pill problem, and now the epidemic that we're dealing with in the north central Kentucky area with heroin. In trying to convey to the public, when we have these issues in a forum such as this that welcomes public opinion and comment, wherein people can draw upon their own conclusions. We won't always agree. I'm relatively certain that there will be people that leave this room today that will not agree with some of what is said, as well as we may not agree with some of what they say. But we should always respect each other's opinion in formulating what we think is best for our communities. So with that in mind, you'll get an opportunity to voice your concerns tonight. I only ask that you do it in a professional and tactful manner, respectful of each other. I'm fond of telling those people in law enforcement that I speak to that when we discuss these issues, there's always room for discussion. There's always room for even debate. But at the end of the day, there should never be room for division, because when we're divided, the communities we serve are failed. So, I want to introduce to you the people that will primarily be presenting to you tonight. The gentleman that I have with me tonight is Detective Mike Nichols with the Owensboro Police Department. I called Diane last week and I said, get a hold of Mike for me, and asked him to send me over a bio I needed for introductory purposes. I waited 2 or 3 days and I didn't get anything. So I called back. I can be a bit of a persistent individual. And I said, Diane, I really need that bio. And she said, well, I'm getting it. Anyway, I did get the bio, and I want to read to you the bio. Detective Nichols is a 16-year veteran of law enforcement. He has been with the Owensboro Police Department since 2002 and joined the narcotics unit in 2009. He is married and has 1 son. That's the end of the bio. As you can tell, it's very, very brief. But, folks, I know Mike Nichols, and I think the paradox here that the brevity of that bio speaks volumes itself. You see, I think what it doesn't say says as much as what it does, if I haven't lost you. I know Detective Nichols is one of those individuals that I like to refer to as a quiet professional. He's devoted and he's dedicated to his job and to his community. He loves what he does. And he does it never in pursuit of recognition or personal accolades. But I believe he is content and is satisfied in the people he helps and the lives he changes. That's the bio I'd like to leave you with Mike Nichols. And I can tell you, Mike, this community is better because of it. Diane has been in the field of prevention for 13 years. Now, she'll speak from a totally different perspective, and I think that's good. Again, we're interested in the totality of the circumstances here. You didn't come to hear just exactly what law enforcement has to say. You see, she combats this problem on the front end. Law enforcement, by and large, although we're trying to do better in terms of being a proactive force as opposed to a reactive, but prevention deals with the problem on the front end and tries to prevent it before it occurs. She served on many prevention boards and currently is the chairperson for the Kentucky Certification Board of Prevention Professionals. She's been the coordinator for the Kentucky Marijuana Prevention Enhancement Site since its inception 3 years ago. She also is the coordinator for the Kentucky Marijuana Prevention Coalition. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'll turn the podium over to these individuals. Please join me in welcoming them both.
Well, as Sheriff Kane alluded, I wouldn't call myself the quiet. My coworkers that are in the room, I do my job as a quiet professional, but when I can be quite loud and boisterous when I want to be as well. So We're going to start with a quick video that kind of portrays where in society we are and how marijuana is viewed, how easily it is that people, it's just one of those things that we talk about. I don't know if anybody's seen this from where this sits right here. Has anybody seen this video before? Okay. Well, then everybody know, then you know what's about to happen. This is the game show Family Feud. Everyone knows what Family Feud is.
All right, guys, here we go. We got the top 6 answers on the board. Name something that gets passed around. Chris.
A joint.
A joint. Yeah. Now, Chris, I don't know what 100 people you thought we were talking to in some nice little mall across good old America, but I'm pretty sure the people didn't tell the survey people, hey, an illegal drug. Let's turn around and see how many weed heads are out there with Chris. A joint.
And you could probably stop that and it'd be funny for what it is, but it gets better.
It's when you know we're going to hell. Okay, Tracy, only 4 answers topic, so.
The collection plate at church.
Now, she's got the halo, and I got the horn.
I like the way you tried to stop us from going to hell. You, Mr. You evil boy, passing around the little thing with this funny smell. Looking for some saving here. Church place. It's less than the joint. This is not good. I'm just gonna you just go over there. They're gonna play this.
Yes, we are.
And now that we've started with a joke, it makes the everybody's a little more receptive. Domestic production. In the state of Kentucky, we have our good things. We also have our bad things, too, in comparison. Along with meth, we're a big meth state. The state of Kentucky is also third in production of marijuana behind Colorado and Tennessee. Kentucky has been among the top 5 domestic producers for over 5 years and we continue to eradicate almost $800 million worth of marijuana and 371 arrests. As far as this slide goes, I'm going to speak about what we do and is at Owensboro, and the guys that are in the room from Davis County Sheriff's Department, they know as well as I do. Marijuana is, I wouldn't call any of it high or low risk. It's all risk, and it's medium to high profit. Just due to the fact that there can be so much grown from an indoor grow, and it can be produced from the plant that getting about $4,000 to $6,000, depending upon where you stand in the food chain, as it comes to me being a narcotics detective, in the food chain of where you are in the distribution of that product. The last case that I worked where I know that marijuana was being mailed in to Kentucky, was being mailed in from California and was being sold for about $4,500 to $6,000 a pound, and 12 pounds was mailed in, and that was just the time that we caught. That had been going on for quite some time, and we hadn't gotten a tip on it just yet. And I think I kind of stole my thunder on this slide that 1 pound can be diverted for anywhere from $4,500 to $6,000. Let you get it started on.
All right.
She's going to talk about all of our numbers.
Okay. I get to be the one to give you numbers and all of that. Appreciate what the sheriff had to say, and I appreciate Detective Nichols also participating in this town hall meeting. We want to look at a lot of different numbers and a lot of different things, and it's, as the sheriff said, I look at it from a prevention standpoint, so we want to do the best we can to protect our kids and to protect our future. So that's where we are. So this slide is looking at 30-day use of marijuana in the state of Kentucky. This is from the KIPP survey. And so what we're seeing, the different colors are people, are the different classes. So we start with the first year that it was administered, and that is the class of 2003. So we have some fairly lengthy data that we go back, and we're seeing each class as we go. And I think you'll see with me that these are all kind of going up, and they're sometimes spiking up. And so we're seeing some increases of use by our youth. And that is, I think we would all agree, that that is a serious point that we need to pay attention to. So we're seeing the use go up, but we're also seeing something else happen. We're seeing the perception that it's risky or harmful going down. So we're seeing our kids who are being bombarded by media, by social media, by a lot of different places that it's just not harmful and there's no problem with using marijuana. We're starting to see that reflect in their use patterns, because as they think there is less harm, then they will use more. This is a national slide, and so we see as the perception of harm goes down, we see the use going up. And I think that that's where we see ourselves in the state of Kentucky, is that use is definitely going up. So when we look at our data, and we see our perception of harm is going down, the bars at the top, and we see the bars at the bottom show that our use is going up. So we're mirroring exactly what we're seeing happen in the nation and going from there. So when we look at the research, we want to know exactly what does the research have to say about this. And we look at documented studies. We are very careful to document where we find our research, because we want to know that we're using the absolute best research that we can find. So what we have found, that regular use compromises our ability to learn and to be able to remember things. When I was in school, it was really important that I remembered things and that I could recall things for tests. And so when we lose our ability to focus and to pay attention, then that causes some issues for us. And also, it impacts the long term as much as it impacts the short term, and we're really looking at what the longitudinal studies say and what really we're looking at down the road as much as what we're looking at for the present moment. Recent study published in the British Journal of Medicine reports that adolescents who started using marijuana before they were age 18 lost as much as 8 points off of their IQ. And it's not if you have 140 IQ, it may not be such a bad thing, but if you're looking at an average IQ of about 100 and you lose 8 points, then that can significantly impact your ability to find a job, your ability to stay employed, your ability to succeed at school, can impact those things there. So that is a serious thing that we look at there. Marijuana is addictive. It has been found to be addictive, and we have looked at the research, and it links that there is possibly, or there is a link to birth defects, respiratory system damage, cancer, mental illness, violence, infertility, and immune system damage. So there's some areas that marijuana interacts with our body and causes problem. The younger that people start using marijuana, the more problems that come from this. There is a correlation to the younger use and having a correlation to schizophrenia as an adult. So it's not that marijuana necessarily causes the schizophrenia, but the marijuana will cause the schizophrenia to present itself if it's latent. We look at the brain, we see a picture of the brain, and we see those little pink dots. Those are receptor sites, and that's what we have in our brains, and those receptor sites are for endocannabinoids. It's naturally occurring in our body. These are the sites that marijuana are attracted to and will go to. And what happens as those receptor sites are filled up with the marijuana, it prevents my own natural endocannabinoid system to be able to produce its own. It basically says, you don't need to bother with this, you can shut down, you can go home. And it produces a high, a different high than what our own can produce. So we see the things that are controlled by these pink dots are visual center, our memory, our reward system, our temperature, body temperature, emotions. These things are all wrapped up in that endocannabinoid system. So we have a natural system that focuses on this, and then when we put the artificial, the marijuana in, it interferes with what we naturally have going on. So when we look at the picture on the left, that's the chemical that we produce. It's called anandamide. Our brain naturally produces this. On the right is the THC. They are very similar in their structure. And when the chemical goes in there and prevents our system from being able to take care of what it needs to. So it fools the brain by filling those receptor sites. So the key function is to keep us in balance of the whole endocannabinoid system. And it doesn't want us to be underactive. It doesn't want us to be overactive. But then when we put something different in there, it keeps us from being able to have that happen. So the basic difference between THC and anandamide are these. They both dial down neuron activity, so they change the neurotransmitter release. But THC has a much stronger and lasts a lot longer than what our own chemicals can possibly last. And it interferes with that function, with our ability to produce the anandamides on our own. And our body can no longer do the things naturally that it is supposed to be able to do. So while THC acts more like a sledgehammer and anandamide acts more like a precision tool, if we're asking a surgeon to operate on us, I think we want the precision tool and not the sledgehammer. So the bottom line is we want to have a balance. We want to keep the balance there. And the best way to do that is to allow our natural chemicals to produce those chemicals and not to completely fill that. So there are other systems, organs that are impacted by the use of marijuana. We see the heart system, we see the respiratory system, we see the birth system, we see all of these things are impacted naturally by marijuana and by our own endocannabinoid system. So when we fill the cannabinoid, then it prevents our body from being able to take care of our cardiovascular system like it should. All right, Detective Nichols, you're up.
Potency, I don't really need to go into great detail about this. Potency, the numbers up there, I don't read from the screen because the numbers there and they speak for themselves. But potency is going up because the people that are growing marijuana and I mean, there's no other way for it to be there other than for it to be grown, are growing more and stronger potency plants because the high is better with the higher concentrations of THC. That is what it is. So obviously that speaks volumes for if one joint is good, then four's got to be better, right? So that's why you see the THC numbers in the last 20 years going up to what they are now, averaging right now. I don't know. I'm not a scientist, so I'm not going to go out and say numbers are what they are, but the studies speak for themselves at about 15% THC. I mean, again, there's not much to say there. The numbers speak for themselves.
So when we look at what this means for the future and where we really need to go, we have been told that marijuana is harmless, but we have seen that there is some harm that can come from using marijuana in its crude form. Marijuana use is glorified. We look at the movies and TV shows, and marijuana use is looked at as okay. And again, as our kids, our youth think that this is harmless, then that causes their use to go up. And then when we look at the efforts to legalize or decriminalize marijuana, they're well funded, they're picking up strength, and they're going. We need to look at the true plant, and we need to find the parts that are good. We need to keep the parts that are good, but we do not need to create a problem for our youth in increased usage. We've had some societal shifts. We've had other drugs that have come in, more awareness of drugs, and public perceives drug war as failure. The drug war has not been a failure. It is a day-by-day thing that we have to do. We have to stay on top of it. We can't say that just because there have been some things that have happened contrary to what we think is good, that means that the whole thing is a failure. There have been successes and things that we have to pay attention to. Legalization advocates have received a lot of money, and prevention hasn't got a lot of money. But we are out trying to do the best we can with the limited resources we have to protect our kids and to make our community safe for our kids.
Legalization, there's really, let me just say this for what it's worth. Marijuana is still, even though there are 2 states that technically now is marijuana is legal, being Colorado and Washington State. Marijuana is still illegal in both those states and is illegal in all 50 states in the United States because the federal government says it's illegal. Okay? The federal government gave up the power to the states to decide whether or not they wanted to prosecute their citizens for possession, trafficking, or whatever type drug offense that state has on the books. The United States government said it is not worth our time to prosecute someone for possession of an ounce of marijuana. It's just the federal government gives that authority to the states. So even though that these states they have medical or they're full-blown decriminalized, that's the better word to say because it's not until the United States government says it is 100% legal, do what you want, it is still illegal in the United States. That's the difference between, when was that taken, that picture?
Last year.
Okay. So between there and now, these are the states that are being targeted to decriminalize in each state. And between, I cannot, for the life of me, what year did California decriminalize? 2000? Well, either way, 98, we're talking about a difference of, 16 years? I mean, then that's pretty much the entire nation in 16 years.
So we want to talk about the truth in medicine and if there is benefit to medical marijuana. And what we have found is that cannabinoids may have therapeutic potential when they're delivered in controlled doses by a non-toxic delivery system, but smoked marijuana has no future as a drug, as a medicine, as something that would provide help. There's a lot of research that's looking at the cannabidiols, and we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight too. So we have another video, and this kind of shows a little bit about what happens with medical marijuana and what has happened in some other states. And again, it's kind of funny. It's not a real-to-life thing, but it just shows the culture of where medical marijuana kind of has gotten.
Doctors will prescribe medical marijuana to anyone, man. What do I tell them I need it for? Doesn't matter. They want to give you a prescription. That's how they get paid. Just make something up. Hey, Mr. Washington, welcome.
Hey, doctor.
All right, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions.
AIDS.
What?
AIDS.
AIDS? As in...
As in, I got it. Need lots of weed to get rid of it.
Okay, AIDS. Wow. All right, are you sure you're not suffering from anything else like, back pain?
Nope.
Anxiety?
Cool as a cucumber.
How about insomnia?
Sleep like a baby. With AIDS.
Okay, Mr. Washington, let's just slow your roll for a second here. If you had AIDS, then I would have to verify it by seeing test results, whereas if you have back pain or anxiety or anything else that I can't test for, then I can give you this prescription for cannabis right now.
Oh.
Understand?
Oh. Yeah, I see. I get
Awesome.
it. My bad.
Good. Okay, so...
Leprosy.
No.
Because if you had leprosy, I'd have to quarantine you.
Ouch.
What do you? No. Okay, I see your fingers falling out.
Ouch.
Don't do that though. That's not gonna work.
Scurvy.
Nope.
Rickets.
What? No.
Consumption.
No, Mr. Washington. Something from this century.
Schizophrenia.
No.
You don't have schizophrenia?
Just
Yes, you do.
keep it simple, please. What the hell is that? I don't know what that is.
Fish hook in my leg.
Just pick something off this list.
I can't reach it.
Why not?
Paralyzed.
Does your face hurt, Mr. Washington?
Yeah.
Then this should help.
Okay, so that is a little bit of a story of, what happens, but there are a lot of people who have taken the medical marijuana, and we look at Colorado and California and Washington and Oregon, we see a lot of medication prescription or marijuana that has been diverted and has gone to youth, and we're going to look at some data from that. But that's not exactly what a doctor's office looks like. This is more of what you would see if you're going to a dispensary. This is what you're going to see. It's not a pharmacy that can dispense these things because of what Detective Nichols said. This is not a federally allowable drug, so it has to go through a dispensary and not a normal pharmacy. Now, we actually have medical marijuana already. We have such things as Marinol, Dronabinol, Sesamet, and then there is a medication by the name of Sativex that's in the last part of clinical trials with the FDA that is used to treat medical conditions. So we're waiting for that to happen. Again, it's coming very near to the end of its clinical trials, and it has had great effect in European countries. So we already have medical marijuana that's here, but we need to perfect that, and we need to look at how we can make that better and how we can make that effective for people who are using it. Now, when we look at these, we would say, well, would we use any of these as medications? And actually, we would, even the molded bread, but we just would not use it in these forms, in their crude, raw forms. But here are the things that we can derive from these products. We can take and we can get Taxol. We can even take our molded bread, and that makes penicillin. Willow bark is aspirin. So we have had to take natural things that are there, and we have had to make them work for us as far as medications are concerned. This has been for a long time that we've been doing this, and the same holds true with marijuana. We should do the same thing. So what exactly does it mean to have FDA approval? First of all, it means that the interactions have been looked at. We're looking at what a standard dose is. How much would each dose be? And can we measure that so that we're sure that when we give our child this dose of medicine, that it's the same each and every time, just as when we have an aspirin and we open up that bottle, we know that each one of those aspirin have the same amount of ingredients in them as the one after it. There's things in there to help us know that that's what we're supposed to be doing. What frequency, what dosage should we be looking at these things? And the FDA says the best route of administration will never be in a smoked product. That's in its crude, raw form. So we're going to have to look at differences in the way that we actually deliver the delivery system that we use. So when we look at marijuana, does it fit the FDA criteria? And we see that it does not. There are some pharmacologies that have been performed that are inadequate at this point, but that's where we are. We have got to look at this and see. And there is a research center at the University of Mississippi that is in control of the marijuana, and they look at the percentages and how they put those together, and they're constantly doing studies on those to see if we can find that. Recently, there has been a drug that the FDA has put into orphan status. It's called Epidiolex. And it's to be used with kids with Dravet syndrome who have the severe seizures from epilepsy. And they're looking for university and research medical centers to be able to administer that to the kids so that we can help with some of these debilitating seizures that they have. Wait to the end. Wait to the end. Thank you. Thank you. So under the current legislation that's been proposed with the General Assembly, it legalizes the cultivation, distribution, sale, and possession of marijuana under the guise of medicine. It says that there are compassion centers and that there would be one required for every 100,000 residents. Cultivation by individual users and caregivers. And there would be no limit on the caregivers as to how many that they could actually caregive for. Each person could have up to 12 ounces, which is the average of 720 joints, and can cultivate up to 12 plants, which produces 1 to 5 pounds each time that it grows, which would be as many as 10,000 joints, and 12 seedlings, which also could produce 2. So when we're looking at this and we talk about what would be use, we're seeing that there's going to be a lot of marijuana left over. And so what is going to happen with that marijuana is that it could be diverted and it could go to our kids. And I think that's an important thing for us. Advocates will tell us that, it's not a problem and this is going to be a good thing. But these are the people who want to bring children to our senators and our legislators and say that if they don't pass this bill, but we have got to look at what is in the children's best interest. And so if we can have a controlled dosage to where we know what they're getting. So what are we hearing from other organizations? Well, the American Medical Association reaffirmed in the fall meeting that marijuana should be considered a dangerous drug and be a public health concern. They also said that sale of and possession of marijuana should not be legalized. And they said that we should be using public health strategies rather than incarceration when handling individuals who have possession, when we find people with that provide them with the help and the treatment that they need and not just put them in jail. The Food and Drug Administration, as we talked about before, said that smoked marijuana is not medicine and that, again, released the Epidiolex to orphan status so that we can help get our kids some treatment. The American Psychiatric Association said, after they gave considerable attention to this, they have said that marijuana is not an effective treatment for any psychiatric issue. No current scientific evidence to prove that it would help with any psychiatric issue at all. And the American Academy of Pediatrics said it opposes the legalization of marijuana and it supports rigorous scientific research, as I think we all would. We want to have the best for our future generations to come. So that is where we are. So we really don't want to replace the pill mills that we have with OxyContin with just dispensaries and places. Most of the people who use marijuana in the states that have legalized, they have found are not using for HIV, for glaucoma, for AIDS, for any of those things. They're using basically for pain. And just as we saw in the video, there's no way to test for pain. There's no way to say this is what the pain level is. So what we have seen with states that have legalized marijuana for medical purposes, they have higher youth use rates than the states who don't have medical marijuana programs. Denver Substance Abuse Treatment Facility said 73.8% of the kids who were in that facility were using diverted marijuana. And then the likelihood of a person that had never smoked cannabis went up 25% after liberalizing the marijuana laws. We see hospital and ER visits would increase. We see significant increases in Colorado. Here's some lessons we've learned from Colorado. This was a report that was published in August of this past year. And this is from the the Rocky Mountain HIDA. And the lessons we learned, we look at from 2006 to 2008, there were no dispensaries operating, and they only had 1,000 to 4,800 medical cards that had been given for cannabis. 2009 to 2012, the scenery changed just a little bit, and there were 532 licensed dispensaries, and look at the number of card holders, 108,000 plus. We saw that traffic fatalities went up for drivers who were using marijuana. It decreased for those who were not using marijuana, but for the people who were using marijuana, the increase was 114%. There were 5% of fatalities in 2006 could be attributed to marijuana. In 2011, 13% of the fatalities could be attributed to marijuana, and this is in Colorado again. The youth use in these same years, it changed, raised significantly. And when we compare their rates to the national averages, the Colorado average was 10.72, where the national average was 7.64. 30-day use rates, again, they were higher in the 30-day use rates, and they were also higher in the daily use rates. And these were kids who reported that they were using 30 to 40 times a month, so using multiple than that. We would see some new things come on the scene as far as the marketing of these. We see some things down here that look kind of familiar to us. We see things that maybe look like a Babe Ruth. We see things that may look like a Butterfinger. But again, these are targeted toward youth, and these are things that they would see. Increased injuries and deaths from impaired driving. Again, we would expect these to go up as they have in other states. We think that would be, and we see the rates here, 100% increase in fatal crashes in California.
The incarceration rates, and there's a stat here in just a minute that talks about us as a county with the Sheriff's Department and with OPD. But many of our drug-related charges are pled down for more serious offenses. That can be attributed across the board, whether it's cocaine, meth, any of those things. The courts do what the courts do. And we can't, once the court gets in control of those cases, some of those cases can be amended down from what they were originally charged. So some of the numbers can be off, so to speak, because they may have been charged, originally charged with trafficking, but it was amended down to a possession case. The number as far as the drug would still be there, but that whether they were selling or just possessing would be off. These numbers come from the DEA, and that they are what they are. 6 times as many homicides are committed by persons under the influence of drugs. And that doesn't just include marijuana, it includes any controlled substances. Most arrestees for violent crimes test positive for drugs at the time of their arrest, and states usually prosecute most marijuana offenses. That's where I said again that the federal government has given the power back to the states and allowing them to prosecute or to decide whether they're going to prosecute for marijuana possession and or trafficking. 20,000 inmates were housed in the system in the state of Kentucky, 74% white, 24% black, and 1% Hispanic. Primary drug offenses represent 22% of Kentucky's total prison population. There's no breakdown for offenders who were sentenced for possession. Possession in and of itself right now we don't even arrest for anymore. That is a citable offense that is just like if a patrolman were to stop you for speeding. It's a citation. It's given in a court date you're required to appear at. This is what is going on between the Davis County Sheriff's Department and the Owensboro Police Department. This is here. There's no numbers from KSP in here, but these numbers speak for themselves. The percentages are up, 15, 12, and 37 across the board for each. That is what it is. The marijuana is not going to go away. The black market, even if it were to be decriminalized, you're still going to have people breaking into dispensaries. You're still going to have it being diverted out the back door of these dispensaries because let's just call it for what it is. Liquor and alcohol we can buy at any liquor store, package store, convenience store in Owensboro, but people still make moonshine. Why do they make moonshine if you can buy liquor at any liquor store? Because they don't want to pay taxes on it. And that's a huge argument for the proponents of decriminalization. Hey, let's decriminalize it and tax it. But it still happens with alcohol. So it's not going to go away. The black market's not going to go away. In fact, it would probably make things worse because the fact that it is the better marijuana because the THC concentration is higher than what is just grown out in the field. That just grows randomly is much higher than with the cultivated stuff that is what's the word I'm looking for? That is made for that use for sale in a dispensary. I've heard this a few times. That people that smoke marijuana they're all happy. They don't care. I'm just going to be for what it is. In my 5-year experience, my 16-year experience with law enforcement, and not just in the narcotics field, guns and drugs go together. I don't care what it is or how it is, okay? People that are doing drugs don't want to get caught by the police, and they keep guns around if they're that serious about it. It is what it is. I wish I had the stats from what we've done and what the Sheriff's Department has done as far as guns and drug seizures in this presentation, because it is what it is. There's guns equal drugs, drugs equal guns.
So we're looking at the differences between alcohol, tobacco, and marijuana. So we're going to take alcohol and tobacco as two legal substances for adults over 18 or over 21 for tobacco and alcohol respectively. But when we look at the societal cost compared to what our revenue is, so if we expect to add in another drug and to make it legal, we might expect...
That's caused by marijuana.
So we
There
have...
are ridiculous numbers on both
Hold on
of
just a
those.
minute, sir. You'll get your opportunity to speak. I promise you. Go ahead.
So we look at the $14 billion in revenue from alcohol, and we see that it costs us $185 billion, and that comes from DUIs, from arrests, from foster care, from all of the issues that present itself as a society that we deal with. Tobacco, we receive $25 billion in revenues, and we expend $200 billion. Those scales are not tipped in the right direction, and so to add another drug to that, we would expect to see the same thing. When we look at the dependence issue, marijuana, compared to all of these other drugs, you see far and away is significantly greater dependence causing than what some of the other things that you see, tranquilizers, cocaine, pain relievers. So we have dependence. We have seen an increase in treatment admissions. The others have gone down with the exception of heroin, and I expect that we're going to see that one go up in the state of Kentucky, particularly over in the central and northeastern parts. But we've seen marijuana increase and go up. So we want to make sure that our residents of Kentucky have legitimate medications that they can use. We think that's fair. That's the way it should be. But we do not want to have a cancer-causing toxic weed that does more harm than it does good. So we support research. We support looking at how we can make this plant be in the best interest of our citizens. So what can we do? We can increase awareness of the problem. We can talk about, and have discussions, educate our communities, support drug-free activities, not just marijuana drug-free, but drug-free totally. Collaborate with our partners for after-school, non-school programs, advocate for policies that protect our communities and those with illnesses, and then I'm going to let Detective Nichols talk about our last bullet.
Anyone that has information on any type of crime, it doesn't have to be drug-related offense, can be about the most recent robbery that the Davis County Sheriff's Department is working, can call and leave an anonymous tip at the number you see there, 270-684-8484. And that you will remain anonymous, and you can be compensated for any information that you give to us that could lead to an arrest. Sure.
Thank you, Mike. Diane. I think I'm going to deviate from our original schedule. I was going to wrap up with a brief presentation, some of what echoes what you've already seen, some of which differs from it. But I sense that there are some people here that have some comments and want to make some comments, and I think in the interest of fairness that we ought to allow them to do so. So, sir, I know you have a few comments. I'd ask that give you the floor.
There's already been 10 families moved from the state of Kentucky to Colorado for epilepsy on the Dravet syndrome that she brought up. Well, there's already a cure for it. They're already healed. These kids are already getting the treatment they need, and they're going from 70 seizures a day to 0 to 1 every 2 weeks. This is fact. Josh Stanley's presented this up at Frankfurt here just a few weeks ago. And there's just every number that was put up there, I can get, if I have access to get up here with the computer on this, I can give you numbers on the other end of it. the numbers on the Colorado has actually decreased on all the stats that I can find. It decreases on the number of auto accidents caused by marijuana and stuff. And there's the usage in kid. I don't think there's anybody in here that expects us to, no matter what your opinion on it, we're not trying to get it for the kids. This is not for the kids unless it's to do with the Dravet syndrome or to help out with epilepsy, which is saving lives. There was a kid in Indiana that died just here not too long ago because his family couldn't afford to uproot from Indiana to Colorado so that he could get the treatment. And then, like I said, there's already been 10 from Kentucky that has moved, and there's 3 that are also right now that are currently with the same Dravet syndrome that are saying they're going to have to move. They're pushing on. There's a lot of advocacy going on right now. We're all fighting for those people. We've been up to Frankfurt a few times. I was there a couple weeks ago. I'm going again. If anybody's interested in going, I'm going again Thursday. There's a meeting with Tommy Thompson and Jim Bowen at 9:30 or 9:30 their time. And I do understand a lot of people say that, it's a gateway drug, and him showing the pictures of the guns there. But if we can go to dispensary to get it, you're keeping me from having to go around somebody that's carrying a gun like that and putting myself out there. I've never done any drugs other than marijuana on my own, for my, of my own knowledge, but I got stuff that was laced because I had to go to a drug dealer to get it.
I'm sorry, sir, I should have.
Surgeries on my leg.
I should have had you to identify yourself. I'm going to ask
I'm Mark
anybody's
Brown.
favor. Mark Brown?
Bradley.
Bradley?
Yes, sir.
Are you here on your own, sir? Do you represent a particular group that you'd want to identify, or?
There's quite a few. We're trying to pass a bill at SB 43, and it has a lot of information. Like for the access of it, like I said, worried about somebody getting in. It's government regulated. It's very strict on how you do it, and government regulated. All the dispensaries are going to have to be well equipped to keep somebody from being able to go in and steal it and whatnot. And I don't know.
Well, again, we certainly appreciate your input and voicing your concerns. That's what this is all about. Just a minute, sir, I've got one gentleman ahead of you. Would you identify yourself, please?
Yes, Rich Nading with the Health Department. Keith, I've got a question. With the upswing in the attempts at legalization, Colorado, Washington, the other areas, have we seen any drop in what's trying to come across the border in the stronger marijuana? Has there been any decrease in what's being tried to be brought across?
I'm not sure I understand your question, sir.
Okay. We've seen videos of the tunnels that the guys are building to bring through bale after bale after bale of marijuana in the hundreds of millions. My question is...
Has there been any decrease in
has there been a decrease because of Colorado, Washington, and any of these other efforts?
I'm not aware of that myself. Might be, but I think I would...
Would that be a natural result if this was...
That's a possibility, and that was going to be my response to your question. I think we're way too early to be able to determine that.
Thank you.
I had another question. Yes, sir, would you identify yourself, please?
A couple comments. I'm a member of Kentucky for Medical Marijuana.
And your name is, sir, I'm sorry?
Daniel Sosh.
Okay, Daniel.
I've been because of medical reasons, been a lifelong supporter of marijuana, and I don't believe nothing of this propaganda that River Valley is putting out up there. If they're concerned about children, they ought to be concerned about the pharmaceutical drugs that they're giving to the kids there every day that is doing them more harm than anything that marijuana could do to them. And I've been a lifelong resident of Kentucky, and I'm ashamed of my state that we lead the world. Let me say that again, sir. We lead the world in locking up our citizens only for marijuana. That's totally shameful in this state. When the governor wants to promote as our leading industry a distilled spirit that's killed thousands, maybe millions, but yet y'all want to sit here and talk bad about marijuana. It doesn't make it. The whole thing of talking bad about marijuana doesn't make any sense. Common sense needs to, as you talk about the divided, there's no middle ground. The ones against don't want to hear the people for. So we're suffering. We've been locked up for years, had our property taken, our homes taken by the government. This is supposed to be America. Half the country now is saying that marijuana is not a crime. Half the country says it is. We're all supposed to be Americans. How can I go to prison in this state and go across the line and not be breaking the law? And the president comes on TV and says that marijuana is not as bad as alcohol. But yet we're still here talking against marijuana. It makes no sense to me. And all the wasted resources that we waste on marijuana. People aren't, when they're not committing a crime in their eyes, they're not going to stop. Period.
We appreciate your comments, sir. Yes, sir.
Bob Darling. My 2 comments. 10 families out of what?
Kentucky.
That's 10 families out of probably a million families?
I don't know what the
Probably a million, there's
population
4 million citizens in Kentucky, so that's 10 out of that. I'm sure 10 families have had to move to Memphis to get their kids treated down at St. Jude's. I mean, any kid having to move is a bad thing, but do you want your kids to smoke? I mean, does anybody in here agree that smoking is the greatest thing in the world? Now, if they can get
Wait a minute, guys. Now, wait a minute. We're not going to turn this into an argument or point counterpoint. Everybody will get their chance to say what they want to say. I promise you that. But we're going to do it in a diplomatic and a professional manner. Go ahead, sir.
Anyway, but just, they already have drugs on the market that do give the kids or the adults, whoever needs it, the chemicals that help stop the seizures and everything else. That's already on the market. They're doing millions of dollars of research every day. And, you know, this thing of, do you know that Kentucky is one of the few states that not every county, not every precinct is dry or wet? When Prohibition was repealed in Kentucky, it was said that each county, each precinct can decide whether it wants to be wet or dry. The citizens vote whether they want it wet or dry. And if the precinct wants to be dry, then the precinct's dry. If we don't want marijuana sold, we don't want marijuana sold. It ought to be the rights of the citizens to speak to their legislators.
That's what the polls are showing, that there's more people in favor. There's one poll that's up to 75% right now in favor of legalization of marijuana. Then there's one, the low end of it was 52%. I went over them all today.
Any more comments? Yes, sir. Please identify yourself.
Gary Cooney. And I've been on about 50 different medications for the VA clinic. And all it causes blackouts, memory loss, fits of rage, violence, domestic violence, kids be taken away. Through social workers that work with MECO to do drug testing, and River Valley gives out the drugs, and it almost kills them. It's ridiculous, and they still give it to them. Right there, I got more bags coming in the mail. Y'all can have them, do away with them, I'll keep the bag in the February, but I don't want them. They haven't been open yet or anything, but
There's a container in the lobby where you can dispense of those if that's what you want to do.
Absolutely.
Thanks, sir.
Any more comments? Again, appreciate it. We appreciate it. Yes, ma'am, we haven't heard from you, please.
Yeah, I'm a social worker and a nurse. I've been in the profession for 30 years.
And your name, ma'am, I'm sorry.
Bonnie Van Vliet.
Thank you.
I'm a licensed practical nurse, and I have a social work degree. And my thing is drug counseling and all kinds of stuff like that. I've worked in a lot of facilities, and I find a problem, in Kentucky. I'm from Pennsylvania originally. I've been down here for about 8 or 9 years, something like that. Having worked in the system here, all my children, and I can attest to this, all of them were overdosed. Every one of them. I went to my supervisors and talked to them, and I got reprimanded because I tried to get my kids' medication reduced. And it's a definite problem. I think that is one. I noticed about marijuana, and I'm kind of giving people some type of support and saying that they're right. And we need to change something in this state to take care of our kids, you know, who are being given Risperdal and all kinds of drugs. I call it shotgun approach to medication. You give them, they're ADHD, they'll have 3 diagnoses. It's ridiculous. Anyway, having come from a place who has good medicine, and I see the problems here, right here in Owensboro. I don't know about the rest of the state, but here in Owensboro, it's a huge, huge problem. And like I said, I've had some disagreements with the establishment, and I'm still known there, and I had a good supervisor and everything, but you know, you can't really fight the whole system. I'm just one person. So.
You're one person with a voice.
I do have a voice.
Margaret Thatcher once said that many people think that just a few committed people can't change the world. But indeed, she said, that's all that ever has.
Right.
So, yes, ma'am.
I'm Gary Hall, and I do work at River Valley. And the thing is that we are just at the very edge of so many advancements in science and medicine. And one of the things that's recently come out that is starting to become affordable is for people to have a DNA makeup of your own personal genome. And what's so exciting about that, and I know pharmacologists and others are excited because basically the medications that we take, any kind of prescription medication, is prescription meds are messy. In other words, there may be a medicine that's supposed to help benefit the heart, but it goes through the brain, it goes through your toes, it goes through your entire body. And so every medication has a side effect. Well, they're finding out now that we are over-medicated. I think that we have too many medications the way it is. So if we have this DNA genome testing, they're now going to be able to more concisely and more accurately give you the right dosage for your genetic makeup. So instead of having 75 milligrams of something, maybe a person only needs 25 milligrams. And so we can reduce down the medications. For children, I think that would be great. And that would probably help benefit this over-medication of America because we do know that if you watch the news, if you watch the media, who seems to, run the gambit of advertisements, it's the prescription medication business, the big pharma. And so I think that, that when we have a conversation about marijuana or anything like this, we do know that anything that becomes legalized will eventually become standardized. And so, it may also be prescribed someday. It may not be now, but someday it may be. So we don't want that to be an over-medication. But also, just like this man said, we've heard, marijuana's been laced with other drugs. We know that, there's no standardization. So that part doesn't work because people are using an unknown substance, unknown strength, unknown level of THC, or whether it's low on THC and high on cannabidiol, the CBDs. So there's no standardization there. So I think we're at the beginning of a challenging conversation for all of us, for healthcare providers, for people that need support and help, for law enforcement, everybody. This is a conversation we all need to have, and I'm glad that we've started that conversation.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. If not, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up with just a very, very brief presentation. It will echo some of what you've already had. Diane called and asked me if I would comment on this at the conclusion of today's program. So I took a little bit different approach from what they did. And I will tell you this, folks. We didn't collaborate on any of this. In fact, I didn't see Diane's presentation until she brought it to my office this morning, nor did she see mine. But I think, in view of the fact that some of the same statistics were found in terms of research and study, does speak to some validity of that. Let's get started. Go ahead. And some of this I'm going to skip through because it's we all know this, and we would all agree with that. I mean, marijuana does have some acute and chronic medical negative repercussions. We've already talked about all this. It's legal in 20 states and in D.C. in terms of medical marijuana. I very much dislike the term medical marijuana. I like the term therapeutic marijuana. Because if we can utilize the cannabinoids of it in terms of it being administered in safe, prescribed, controlled dosage unit in a non-toxic delivery system, i.e. non-smokable, then that's something that I can get behind and we can talk about. Now, then again, we can agree to disagree at this particular point, but again, those are my thoughts at this particular time. What I went to was the Bible of marijuana application. and that's High Times Magazine. I'm sure many of you in here are very familiar with that. I went to High Times, and I've obtained from High Times Magazine 10 of the reasons that they believe marijuana should be legalized. And I looked at those 10 particular things and then tried to come up with my own research. This is what I have come up with. This is what I see as the facts. First indication of marijuana prohibition is an injustice. That is, if alcohol and tobacco are legal, then it's only just that marijuana should be legal also. Now then, very, very quickly, I was asked the other day by Jim Mays in preparation of a story for this, and I'm sure many of you read it in the paper the other day. And my thoughts are, bottom line, folks, is, as far as I'm concerned, based on my experience of 40 years in this business, is that any time a drug is more available to the public, then the abuse of that drug rises dramatically with it. And an increased availability of marijuana to me is bad news for this community. Okay? Do we really need to legalize another mind-altering drug? What other drugs must we legalize to accomplish this version of justice? Where does it end? And you follow what I'm saying there. Do we potentially sacrifice a generation of Americans for a social experiment and attempt to be just? My response is no. Marijuana has positive attributes, that is, medical value, recreational value with limited side effects. I'm not going to go over this with you again, folks, and I know some of you in the room have already voiced your discontent to this and non-belief of it. But, again, I can only look at the research that's been done. And mine, as you'll see, mirrors very closely to what you've already said. The American Medical Association, the National Academy of Science, all these indicated in their research, indicating bottom line is medical marijuana is a bad idea.
I can find you.
Sir, you have heard your say, and now you're going to allow me to have mine, okay? Marijuana has positive attributes. A natural substance grown in a non-laboratory environment causes difficulties in controlling specific dosage levels of an active ingredient. No other medicine is delivered in that fashion, a non-toxic delivery fashion, that is, or i.e., smoking marijuana. No other medicine also, folks, now consider this, it's not been mentioned today. Should we legalize or make a drug a medicine by virtue of popular vote? There's not any other medicine known in existence today that is done that way. You heard Diane talk about what medicine has to go through, the clinical research, prerequisites and whatnot, by the FDA before it says, yes, this is something that's good for human consumption or has a valid medicinal purpose. And we're wanting to legalize marijuana by popular vote. I just suggest to you that it's cause for concern. Do I have the answers, the definitive answers to all of these questions? I wish the gentleman had got up angry and left. I don't have. But my point is that we ought to be asking these questions before we move ahead, full steam ahead. Number 3, tax marijuana sales to support beneficial government programs, i.e. education. I've even heard law enforcement, okay? But this has already been indicated to you. Perhaps the best thing that we have to go to at least get somewhat of a semblance of how this would work is the tobacco and the liquor industry. Take a look. Annual cost, social cost to society of alcohol is at almost $225 billion. That's a loss of productivity, health cost, increased law enforcement, accidents, almost $750 per man, woman, and child. I don't know about y'all, but I don't even know how much $250 billion is. And if we look, according to the CDC, there's over 105,000 alcohol-related deaths in the year to date. You know, I looked at that in doing the research, and I had to stop and think about it. Sometimes, folks, I've got to stop and put things in perspective. We utilize these statistics, and all of a sudden they just become numbers. Let me tell you how it became very real to me. I just got back from Washington, D.C., dealing with this very issue, as a matter of fact, with the Drug Enforcement Committee of the National Sheriff's Association, which I have the honor and the privilege of chairing. I can tell you that every time I go to Washington, I get up at least one morning, and I jog over from the J.W. Marriott downtown in Washington, I jog over to the National Mall, right at daylight, when there's very few people at the mall, particularly the weather that we had up there when I was up there. And I get there early every morning, to visit a place that's very, very sacred to me. It's the Vietnam Wall. And I'll tell you this story to just illustrate this point. As I approached that granite V, and I stood at the juncture of that V, I looked to my left at that wall, as I've done innumerable times before when I've been in Washington, and I looked at the names of some 26,000 Americans that lost their lives in that conflict. And then I turned and I looked to my right, and I looked at the names of about 26,000 more. You do the math, that's about 53,000 people that lost their lives in a war for this country, a senseless and a needless war, I might add. 56,000 in a war that lasted some 13 years. And what I'm telling you, folks, is we're killing double that number every year as a result of this one particular drug. Sometimes we really need to stop and think what these numbers really mean. Total alcohol taxes collected in 2010 were right at $21.3 billion. So you look, the annual cost at almost $225 billion, and the generated revenue is $21.3. You tell me if that's economically feasible. And it's very, very similar with tobacco. $21 billion cost, $25 billion in revenue. I can only assume, folks, that it would be something very similar to that with taxable income of marijuana. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question definitively. But I'm telling you, we need to be asking ourselves these questions before we rush headlong in to passing House Bill 43 that the gentleman mentioned. I'm very familiar with that legislation. Marijuana is safer than alcohol. This relates back to the injustice argument that I mentioned to you earlier. I can only refer you back to the AMA study that was mentioned. I can tell you definitively, I know because I've worked it, I've seen it, I've observed it, I've lived it for 40 years in this community as a law enforcement officer. And I will tell you, you will find anybody hard-pressed to find anybody that loves this community more than I do. And I can tell you that the vast number of individuals that I've encountered that are involved in drugs started that drug involvement on this drug. Now, that's not a statistic I found in research. I know that. That tells me there's an issue, that there's a problem that we need to be talking about. Marijuana prohibition is based on a distortion of science. Most claims of danger are based on 20th century prejudices. I'll only refer you back to Mr. Onslinger that I spoke to you about when I started this about an hour ago. And the answer to that is some of it is, absolutely. And we did ourselves an injustice with that. But it still does not negate what is going on right now. The AMA study that I mentioned to you, National Academy of Sciences, marijuana linked to psychosis, the 2011 study, and all the dependency issues that you've already heard about that I'm not going to reiterate to you. This is the issue of industrial hemp. I only threw it in here because I think any discussion on marijuana at least ought to include it. It's a totally different issue with regards to hemp being very, very low in THC content. But here's why I think it's important. I think this particular argument is taking away a lot of attention that ought to be directed on what we are talking about. It's a red herring that we ought to be aware of. Simplify the development of hemp as a valuable agricultural crop and biofuel source. Reduce funds for international criminal organizations. This is what Mike was talking to you about. If we legalize it, then all the issues with the black market and the cartels go away. Balderdash, poppycock, and gutter rubbish, folks. That's just not true. Drug trafficking organizations' use of legalization, they'll utilize it to their advantage. If you think these people are going out of business simply because we legalize this drug, you're fooling yourself. Spillover distribution, if they can buy legalized marijuana for this price, and they can buy it on the black market for this price, where do you think they're going to go to for that marijuana? I will submit to you that the problem will only increase, not decrease. Here are the states that have legalized it. There are 20 plus D.C. This is marijuana that was seized down in, forgive me, I forget the state. I want to say it's Georgia. I know it was a southern state. Several kilos of the drug. It was all traced back to medical marijuana that was diverted from California. Folks, I talked to my peers from California, the sheriffs in California. I talked to my peers from the state of Washington, and I talked to my peers from the state of Colorado about this very issue. And by and large, the vast majority of them said, this is bad. You don't want to go here. It's not a good thing for your communities. Legalization will reduce marijuana use by teens. Remove the risk, folks, the demand goes up, lower the price, the consumption will increase. This is just what I referred to you earlier. As long as there's more of a drug available, abuse and misuse of that drug rises dramatically with it. That is a realism that I have seen and I know to be a fact. And it's true with whatever drug that you're talking about. It's why we saw the increase in methamphetamine in 2000. It wasn't because it was a new drug, it was because we had learned to make it here locally. And because we've learned to make it here locally, there was more of it. And because there was more of it, the use expanded expeditiously, and before you know it, we were involved in an epidemic.
Hallelujah.
Is there anybody that wants to do that with marijuana here? Prohibition does not work. People are still smoking marijuana. Greater accessibility, greater consumption. Potential long, let's back up there. Oh, man, what did I do here? Decree,
You want to go back?
yeah, please. There we go. The RAND study, one of the most trusted research think tanks that everybody quotes. 2010 RAND study noted that the availability and lower prices will increase marijuana consumption. Folks, this is not just law enforcement. You've heard from the American Medical Society, you've heard from the National Academy of Sciences, and that list goes on and on and on. I know that because I did the research myself and looked at what these people had to say. Potential law enforcement.
Personnel issues.
Is that part of my slide or was that yours? I guess that's mine. This is just another one of those unanswered questions that we have. If this stuff is legalized, is anybody thinking about this? The employee's right to use legal medical marijuana prior to employment. Employee's right to use marijuana off-duty after being employed. Quality of the applicant pool that we're hiring from. Our police officers, for one. I can tell you as a law enforcement executive and administrator, this is concerning to me. Decrease in educational attainment. Drug driving. I wish the gentleman hadn't left because I would tell him he's in error, folks. I know he's in error because I've seen the research. I've talked to the officers from Colorado, and this is a fact. 2006 to 2011, when medical marijuana was in Colorado, the national average was vehicle fatalities was going down at a rate of about 15%. And they looked at the figures in Colorado, and it was mirroring that. It was going down about 16%. But they looked at how many of those 16% were under the influence of marijuana, and that figure jumped to 114%. That should tell us something. Big tobacco, big marijuana. They alluded to this in their presentation also, about the issue of advertisement, how it will target our media. Altria, parent company of Philip Morris, one of the leading tobacco manufacturers in the country today, has already obtained the domain names of altriamarijuana.com and altriacannabis.com. These people are gearing up for this, folks. They're gearing up for it because there is money to be made. I've got another video, but I would suspect if I told you right now, you'd rather go home than to see another video, so I'm not going to show it to you. And it echoes much of what you've already said here. But let me wrap this up with, yes, sir, and I'll take your
I
comment.
just want, real quick, about your law enforcement personnel. That's why the Army, the military, is having such a problem, is because more people are using illegal drugs, and they then can't qualify to go into the military. So we have to do other types of things. Who knows? Maybe someday we'll hire folks from south of the border to do our fighting. I don't know.
Let's hope not.
Yeah.
Let me wrap up with a story, folks. How many of you here saw the movie The Patriot? If you haven't, go see it. It's a good movie. Or you don't have to go see it now. You can rent it, bring it home, or they show it on TV all the time. If you didn't see the movie The Patriot, it's loosely based on a segment of the life history of a gentleman by the name of Lieutenant Colonel Francis Marion, also known as the Swamp Fox. And history tells us that Colonel Marion was a great Revolutionary War hero, and indeed he was. But the point that I want to make to you here tonight was that early on, and a lot of people aren't aware of this, early on, Colonel Marion was vehemently opposed to the Revolutionary War. That's brought out in the movie. You see, he was opposed to the war because he had experienced war up close and personal. And like all of those of us that have done that, we understand the carnage associated with war. There's not anything glorifying about it. And he didn't want any part of that for his countrymen, for his community, and most importantly, for his kids. And so he was against it. He was against it, and he spoke against it, just in town forums as I'm speaking to you here today. And it wasn't a popular voice. People were angry at him. They called him a traitor. They called him a coward because of his stance on the war. And in the early scenes of that movie, if you'll recall, he is speaking in defense of his position against the war. And he makes this statement. He said, "Make no mistake about it. If we fight this war, we will do so in our own backyards." And he goes on. He says, "And our children will bear witness to it." End quote. Why'd I give you that bit of a history lesson at Marijuana Town Forum meeting? We've been engaged in what has been referred to as the war on drugs in this country for years, long before I was a police officer. It actually wasn't called a war on drugs until 1971. That term was actually coined by the media during the Nixon administration, if you're interested in that bit of trivia. But it's, I believe, an adequate analogy. Because you see, if you think about it, there's three things that war has in common. Number one, it leaves in its wake counsel its victims. Every war that you've ever read about, those of you that have experienced it, understand that. It leaves in its wake countless victims. And the war on drugs, as we all know, is no different. We see it every day. That's why we're here tonight. I'd like to think that's why we're here tonight. The second thing that it has in common with every other war is it says, you see, if you're going to have a war, you got to have soldiers to fight the good fight, do you not? So my question to you, gang, is simply this. Who are the soldiers on the war on drugs? Who's going to be called upon to take the battle to the enemy? Is it the police officers? Is it the prevention specialist? I'll tell you who it is. It's you people. It's you people that are going to make the difference. It's not us. I've been in law enforcement, folks, for 40 years, and I don't know a police officer yet that wears a cape behind his uniform. There ain't none of them that are superheroes. We're just not that good. We're committed, we're devoted, we're dedicated, and we believe in what we do, but we cannot win this war alone. We can't do it. If we're to be successful, we have to be engaged and involved with our community. We need your help. And if we have that help, we can win this war. I heard Diane make the statement earlier that we haven't lost the war on drugs, and thank you for saying it. And I know that one gentleman took issue with that. And I've heard that said repeatedly over and over and over in the media, that we've lost the war on drugs. I beg to differ, folks. Some of you have heard me say this before, and you'll hear me say it again at every opportunity and forum and platform you allow me to say it at. We haven't lost the war on drugs because we continue to fight the war on drugs. Have we lost battles along the way? Yeah, sure we have. But I would submit to you that there are success stories out there today. There are success stories right in this very community that she can tell you about and that he can tell you about. And that's what keeps us going. And the last and final analogy that I'll give you with regards to the war on drugs and war is that every war has its battle fronts. And what has changed in more recent years, folks, is that the battle lines have all changed. You see, we used to try to stem the flow of drugs coming across our borders into our country. High-grade marijuana from Mexico, cocaine from the Colombias, ecstasy from the Netherlands, heroin from the Middle East. But now it's a homegrown problem. Marijuana, methamphetamine. Do you remember Colonel Marion's words? We'll fight this battle in our own backyards. And I will also remind you of this, folks. Our children bear witness to it. I don't know about any of the rest of you. I take that back. I do know about the rest of you, because I know most of you in here. And that's why you're sitting in those chairs today. Even these guys that disagree with us, they would agree with me on this point. It's about the kids. I don't know what everybody's opinion on. We may differ on a lot of different things, but here's what the proverbial bottom line is for me. Is if we lax the prohibitions and the policies on marijuana, what I see as a clear and foreseeable future is that there'll be very grave and negative consequences to our communities and to our kids. And now here's the light at the proverbial end of the tunnel. I never like to end on a sour note. If it's foreseeable and if it's predictable, it's preventable. All we got to do is just take a stance. We got to get just as emotional and just as involved and just as engaged and just as angry as those gentlemen that got up and walked out. I really wish they had. I respect their opinion. I disagree with it vehemently, but I respect it. And I'll say one thing about it. They're willing to don't voice their opinion. There's too many people that are sitting in these chairs that aren't willing to. Appreciate you coming tonight. Have safe travels that brought you here. Return you home safely. God bless each and every one of you.
Please be sure to fill this out on the form, if you will, complete these, and just move around the table.
Eric, can I mention something?
Okay.
Yeah, no problem, no problem.
Just a moment, they left. So
Well, we knew that was going to happen. Yeah, you couldn't absolutely expect that was going to happen. They were going to leave. Oh, yeah. I'm just glad that they're going to.